Nigel Farage, the leader of ReformUK, has unexpectedly resigned his parliamentary seat in Clactononsea, triggering a sudden by-election scheduled on 13 of August 2026. And the conundrum: he is immediately campaigning to regain the position. He is running to win his own seat back, the position he just resigned from.
I will resign as a Member of Parliament for Clactononsea, thereby forcing a by-election, which should happen, I hope, in short order. No, I've decided that the people of Clacton should be the judges of my actions. This will be a people versus the establishment by-election. It's a chance to stick two fingers up to the entire establishment, to frankly tell them where to go. And that is why I will be putting my name forward to stand in this by-election. I will fight to win. I will fight to continue the political revolution that Reform has started. And I would say this to you, the voters of Clacton: if I win, you win. Because if I lose, they win. And we will never, with the two old parties, get the type of fundamental change that we need to fix broken Britain.
But the Labour, the Conservative, the Liberal Democrats, the Green Party, and Restore Britain, nation's 5 largest political parties, have united to completely boycott the election. They are refusing to field a single candidate against him.
Refusing to stand a candidate in the Clacton by-election, which was triggered by the resignation of its leader Nigel Farage. This morning, the ReformUK leader defended himself over accusations of improperly declaring financial support.
And consequently, Farage's main opponent is now a satirical comedy figure wearing a literal garbage bin on his head, CountBinface.
Am I standing? I mean, right now I'm sitting, and it depends on getting the 10 nominations from the good humans of Clacton, if, of course, Nigel Farage doesn't do a reverse Ferret because he's terrified of the prospect of facing me.
If you read newspaper, they tell you that this is a chaotic stunt, bizarre political circus. But why did Nigel Farage actually decide to take this drastic step? So apparently Farage failed to declare millions of pounds in financial gifts, a colossal £5 million unconditional cash injection from cryptocurrency billionaire Christopher Harborne. And the Parliamentary Standard Commissioner is now investigating the case. While Farage claims the funds were strictly for his personal security team, standard watchdogs were closing in on to the fact that he failed to declare it under the parliamentary rules. Facing an imminent guilty verdict that would have triggered a mandatory suspension from the House of Commons, Farage needed an emergency escape route. Therefore, he triggered this pure madness. But in political science, madness is rarely random. Strip away the media noise and you will see that Farage maneuvers are highly calculated. It is a masterclass textbook of preemptive strike. Today, we're going to break down this entire crisis using game theory, the mathematical study of how rational players make strategic choices. We will analyze why quitting his seat was actually a mathematically dominant strategy and how the big parties that are boycotting this election used a Minimax strategy to completely drain his victory of value, and why this short-term win might bring Nigel Farage to a long-term repeated game trap. To understand why Farage resigned, we must first model the conflict he was locked into. This was an asymmetric sequential game of perfect information. So let's unpack those heavy academic terms so we can see the trap he was in. First, asymmetric simply means a total imbalance of power. So Farage and the watchdog were not equal opponents. The chessboard they're playing is heavily tilted against Farage. He was just an individual player, while his opponent, the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, held all legal and constitutional power. They owned the rule book, they controlled the timeline, and they had ultimately authority to hand down a punishment. Farage was completely exposed to their decision. And then second, we have the sequential. It means a fixed turn-based chain of reaction. So you imagine player A moves and then the player B reacts and the game flows down a set of track. The commissioner takes a turn and then Nigel Farage is legally forced to take his turn and goes on like a sequence of dominoes. And combine those two with perfect information, which means total transparency. There were no secrets, neither side was guessing. Both Farage and the watchdog knew exactly what cards the other was holding. And what were those cards? It is the mountain of undeclared wealth flowing to Farage that I mentioned before. You have to pay attention in here because we're not talking about a few missing lunch receipts, yeah? The watchdog, the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, had the actual paperwork for the enormous £5 million cash gift from the crypto billionaire Christopher Harborn, plus the free use of a luxury 5-story townhouse near Buckingham Palace provided by his ally George Cottrell. Farage had not declared any of it. Because both sides could see the exact same evidence, Farage knew he couldn't bluff his way out. The train was heading straight toward a conviction, and everyone knew it. Under the rules of the House of Commons, the watchdog held all the power, and Farage was stuck on an automatic conveyor belt. If he just sat there and did nothing, the final destination was 100% predictable. He would be found guilty, suspended from the parliament, and an automatic recall petition where his own voters could sign a petition to kick him out of the office. In game theory, we use numbers called utility payoffs to measure how good or bad situation is. Sitting still and letting the system humiliate him and throw him out of the parliament carries a score of -10, which is the worst case scenario. Now you might be wondering, where does this number -10 come from? So in game theory, we use utility values to rank a player's choice from the best choice to the worst choice. So to make it easier to imagine, let's think of it like a customer review scale running from -10 to +10. So the +10, which is, we call it as the maximum payoff, will be a flawless victory where, in this case, Farage defeats the investigation and keeps his seats. And then let's say in the middle we have the +5, which is the medium payoff. It is a tactical escape for Farage. And we have also the -10 we mentioned before, which is the catastrophic payoff. It is a loss of political power and reputation for Farage. In the game theory, a rational player will do whatever it takes to avoid the -10 payoff. So what does the rational player do when they are trapped on a track heading straight for a political disaster to -10 payoff? They don't just accept the defeat. They strike first and rewrite the architecture of the entire game. And this is exactly why Farage quit. By resigning, he grabbed the first mover advantage and exploited a major loophole, which is the watchdog, the standard commissioner, can only investigate people who are actually sit in the parliament. So only 2 active members of the parliament. The exact microsecond Farage resigned, the commissioner's move was legally frozen. He stripped the regulator of their legal standing just because he's no longer an MP. But if you think he's running away somewhere, no. Farage did not just run away. By triggering a sudden by-election in his home turf, which is the Clactononsea, he reset the board of the game into a simultaneous game. He shifted the battlefield from Westminster courtroom, where his survival score was absolutely zero, to a local ballot box where he has a 98% chance of winning. He replaced a rigid legal process where he was facing the -10 payoff with an open democratic vote holding a projected at least +5 payoff. It is a masterclass in tactical survival. So now let's switch sides on the board and look at the mainstream political establishment. So when Farage triggered this by-election, he forced the five major parties, which is the Labour, the Tories, the Greens, the Lib Dems, and Restore Britain, into a game they absolutely did not want to play. They faced a brutal matrix choice: step into the ring, play the game, or walk away entirely. To find their optimal move, the big parties used what game theorists called as the Minimax strategy, which is a fancy academic term for cutting your losses and minimizing the maximum damage your rifle can do to you. It is a pure defensive damage control calculation. So now let's do the math by considering the utility payoffs. If the big parties choose to fight, let's say that is the strategy A, they spent a fortune running against Farage in Clacton, which is the massive ReformUK stronghold. If Farage beats them in a fierce, high-profile race, he gets the ultimate prize, which is a massive democratic mandate that will erase his financial scandals, and that will be a +10 for Nigel Farage. And to prevent this, the big parties choose the strategy B, let's say, which is boycott. By refusing to field a single candidate, they denied him that prize and successfully minimizing Farage's maximum potential gain. They completely drained the election of its legitimacy. They removed the political value of the game. And Farage possibly is still going to win on August 13th. But because of the boycott, he is not defeating the political elite. He is defeating the CountBinface.
Touchdown in a land called Minimax. Make it great again.
In game theory terms, the boycott successfully neutralized Farage's utility yield, turning what should have been a grand democratic triumph into a hollow gimmick. While Nigel Farage has successfully executed a short-term escape, his strategy suffers a fatal flaw. especially when subjected to long-term modeling. He modeled this crisis as a one-shot game, but actually politics doesn't work like that. Politics is not a one-shot game, it is a repeated game with infinite horizon. The game never stops, and the players have to interact over and over again under the rules that don't change. Yes, he's going to win the race on 13th of August. Bookmakers have priced him as a heavy 1/8 favorite. If you're not a betting person, let me translate that math to you. So it means 89% implied probability of victory for Farage. In betting world, those odds means that if you bet £8 on Farage win, you only will make £1 in profit. So obviously, this is no longer a gamble. It is an administrative formality. So even though he's going to win, but look at what happens the exact moment he wins. He must walk back into the Palace of Westminster, take the oath, and be resworn as an MP. And the absolute split second he becomes an MP again, the game state resets. The pause button is unclicked, and the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner, the watchdog's legal jurisdiction, returns. The files on the undeclared crypto-million and the luxury townhouse are reopened, and the sequence starts from the scratch again. So Nigel Farage did not escape the system. He did not escape the machine. He just spent immense political capital and forced an expensive local election just to hit a snooze on the timer. He won the opening round, yes, but he's trapped in a loop. But this leaves us with an even bigger puzzle. If this entire move is just short-term, temporary, so why do the voters on the ground let him play these games? Why is his local base completely unbothered by secret crypto millions? So to understand the magic trick, we have to transition from the math of game theory to the raw data of political economy. In part 2, we are going to look at the actual anatomy of Clactononsea. We need to look at who is funding the movement, who it leaves behind, and how a billionaire's wallet ends up changing the fate of a coastal town. And this is exactly what we're breaking down in part 2. I'll see you there. Sapere aude, dare to know. Ciao!